Chapter 52. The fact Gerhardt was dead made no particular difference to Lester, except as it affected Jennie. He had liked the old German for his many sterling qualities, but beyond that he thought nothing of him one way or the other. He took Jennie to a watering place for 10 days to help her recover her spirits, and it was soon after this that he decided to tell her just how things stood with him. He would put the problem plainly before her. It would be easier now, for Jennie had been informed of the disastrous prospects of the real estate deal. She was also aware of his continued interest in Mrs. Gerald. Lester did not hesitate to let Jennie know that he was on very friendly terms with her. Mrs. Gerald had, at first, formally requested him to bring Jennie to see her, but she never had called herself, and Jennie understood quite clearly that it was not to be. Now that her father was dead, she was beginning to wonder what was going to become of her. She was afraid that Lester might not marry her. Certainly, he showed no signs of intending to do so. By one of those curious coincidences of thought, Robert also had reached the conclusion that something should be done. He did not, for one moment, imagine that he could directly work upon Lester. He did not care to try, but he did think that some influence might be brought to bear on Jennie. She was probably amenable to reason. If Lester had not married her already, she must realize full well that he did not intend to do so. Suppose that some responsible third person were to approach her and explain how things were, including, of course, the offer of an independent income. Might she not be willing to leave Lester and end all this trouble? After all, Lester was his brother, and he ought not to lose his fortune. Robert had things very much in his own hands now and could afford to be generous. He finally decided that Mr. O'Brien of Knight, Keatley and O'Brien would be the proper intermediary, for O'Brien was suave, good-natured, and well-meaning, even if he was a lawyer. He might explain to Jennie very delicately just how the family felt, and how much Lester stood to lose if he continued to maintain his connection with her. If Lester had married Jennie, O'Brien would find it out. A liberal provision would be made for her, say $50,000 or $100,000, or even $150,000. He sent for Mr. O'Brien and gave him his instructions. As one of the executors of Archibald Cain's estate, it was really the lawyer's duty to look into the matter of Lester's ultimate decision. Mr. O'Brien journeyed to Chicago. On reaching the city, he called up Lester and found out to his satisfaction that he was out of town for the day. He went out to the house in Hyde Park and sent in his card to Jennie. She came downstairs in a few minutes, quite unconscious of the import of his message. He greeted her most blandly. "This is Mrs. Cain?" he asked, with an interlocutory jerk of his head. "Yes," replied Jennie. "I am, as you see by my card, Mr. O'Brien of Knight, Keatley and O'Brien," he began. "We are the attorneys and executors of the late Mr. Cain, Mr. Cain's father. You'll think it's rather curious my coming to you, but under your husband's father's will there were very certain conditions stipulated which affect you and Mr. Cain very materially. These provisions are so important that I think you ought to know about them. That is, if Mr. Cain hasn't already told you. Pardon me, but the peculiar nature of them makes me conclude that possibly he hasn't." He paused, a very question mark of a man, every feature of his face in interrogation. "I don't quite understand," said Jennie. "I don't know anything about the will. If there's anything that I ought to know, I suppose Mr. Cain will tell me. He hasn't told me anything as yet." "Ah," breathed Mr. O'Brien, highly gratified. "Just as I thought. Now, if you will allow me, I'll go into the matter briefly. Then you can judge for yourself whether you wish to hear the full particulars. Won't you sit down?" They had both been standing. Jennie seated herself, and Mr. O'Brien pulled up a chair near to hers. Now to begin, he said. I need not say to you, of course, that there was considerable opposition on the part of Mr. Kane's father to this union between yourself and his son. I know, Jenny started to say, but checked herself. She was puzzled, disturbed, and a little apprehensive. Before Mr. Kane Sr. died, he went on, he indicated to Mr. Lester Kane that he felt this way. In his will, he made certain conditions governing the distribution of his property, which made it rather hard for his son, your husband, to come into his rightful share. Ordinarily, he would have inherited 1/4 of the Kane Manufacturing Company, worth today in the neighborhood of $1 million, perhaps more. Also, 1/4 of the other properties, which now aggregate something like $500,000. I believe Mr. Kane Sr. was really very anxious that his son should inherit this property. But owing to the conditions which Mr. Kane's father made, Mr. Lester Kane cannot possibly obtain his share, except by complying with a certain wish which his father had expressed. Mr. O'Brien paused, his eyes moving back and forth sidewise in their sockets. In spite of the natural prejudice of the situation, he was considerably impressed with Jenny's pleasing appearance. He could see quite plainly why Lester might cling to her in the face of all opposition. He continued to study her furtively as he sat there waiting for her to speak. "And what was that wish?" she finally asked, her nerves becoming just a little tense under the strain of the silence. "I'm glad you were kind enough to ask me that," he went on. "The subject is a very difficult one for me to introduce. Very difficult. I come as an emissary of the estate. I might say as one of the executors under the will of Mr. Kane's father. I know how keenly Mr. Kane feels about it. I know how keenly you will probably feel about it. But it is one of those very difficult things which cannot be helped, which must be got over somehow. And while I hesitate very much to say so, I must tell you that Mr. Kane Sr. stipulated in his will that unless again his eyes were moving sidewise to and fro, he saw fit to separate from you. He paused to get a breath. He could not inherit this or any other sum, or at least only a very minor income of 10,000 a year, and that only on condition that he should marry you. He paused again. I should add, he went on, that under the will he was given 3 years in which to indicate his intentions. That time is now drawing to a close. He paused, half expecting some outburst of feeling from Jenny. But she only looked at him fixedly, her eyes clouded with surprise, distress, unhappiness. Now she understood. Lester was sacrificing his fortune for her. His recent commercial venture was an effort to rehabilitate himself, to put himself in an independent position. The recent periods of preoccupation, of subtle unrest, and of dissatisfaction over which she had grieved were now explained. He was unhappy. He was brooding over this prospective loss, and he had never told her. So his father had really disinherited him. Mr. O'Brien sat before her, troubled himself. He was very sorry for her, now that he saw the expression on her face. Still, the truth had to come out. She ought to know. I'm sorry, he said, when he saw that she was not going to make any immediate reply, that I have been the bearer of such unfortunate news. It is a very painful situation that I find myself in at this moment, I assure you. I bear you no ill will personally. Of course, you understand that. The family really bears you no ill will now. I hope you believe that. As I told Mr. Kane, At the time the will was read, I considered it most unfair, but of course, as a mere executive under it and counsel for his father, I could do nothing. I really think it best that you should know how things stand, in order that you may help your husband. He paused significantly. If possible, to some solution. It seems a pity to me, as it does to the various other members of the family, that he should lose all this money. Jenny had turned her head away and was staring at the floor. She faced him now steadily. He mustn't lose it, she said. It isn't fair that he should. I'm most delighted to hear you say that, Mrs. Kane, he went on, using for the first time her improbable title as Lester's wife without hesitation. I may as well be very frank with you, and say that I feared you might take this information in quite another spirit. Of course, you know, to begin with that, the Kane family is very clannish. Mrs. Kane, your husband's mother, was a very proud and rather distant woman. And his sisters and brothers are rather set in their notions as to what constitute proper family connections. They looked upon his relationship to you as irregular, and pardon me if I appear to be a little cruel, as not generally satisfactory. As you know, there had been so much talk in the last few years that Mr. Kane Sr. did not believe that the situation could ever be nicely adjusted, so far as the family was concerned. He felt that his son had not gone about it right in the first place. One of the conditions of his will was that if your husband, pardon me, if his son did not accept the proposition in regard to separating from you and taking up his rightful share of the estate, then to inherit anything at all. The mere 10,000 a year I mentioned before, he must, pardon me, I seem a little brutal, but not intentionally so, marry you. Jenny winced. It was such a cruel thing to say this to her face. This whole attempt to live together illegally had proved disastrous at every step. There was only one solution to the unfortunate business. She could see that plainly. She must leave him, or he must leave her. There was no other alternative. Lester living on $10,000 a year? It seemed silly. Mr. O'Brien was watching her curiously. He was thinking that Lester both had and had not made a mistake. Why had he not married her in the first place? She was charming. There is just one other point which I wish to make in this connection, Mrs. Kane, he went on softly and easily. I see now that it will not make any difference to you, but I am commissioned and, in a way, constrained to make it. I hope you will take it in the manner in which it is given. I don't know whether you are familiar with your husband's commercial interests or not. No, said Jenny simply. Well, in order to simplify matters and to make it easier for you, should you decide to assist your husband to a solution of this very difficult situation, frankly, in case you might possibly decide to leave on your own account and maintain a separate establishment of your own, I'm delighted to say that any sum, say, Jenny rose and walked dazedly to one of the windows, clasping her hands as she went. Mr. O'Brien rose also. Well, be that as it may, in the event of your deciding to end the connection, it has been suggested that any reasonable sum you might name, $50, $75, $100,000, Mr. O'Brien was feeling very, very generous toward her, would be gladly set aside for your benefit, put in trust, as it were, so that you would have it whenever you needed it. You would never want for anything. Please don't, said Jenny, hurt beyond the power to express herself, unable mentally and physically to listen to another word. Please don't say any more. Please go away. Let me alone now, please. I can go away. I will. It will be arranged, but please don't talk to me anymore, will you? I understand how you feel, Mrs. Kane, went on Mr. O'Brien, coming to a keen realization of her sufferings. I know exactly. Believe me, I've said all I intend to say. It has been very hard for me to do this. Very hard. I regret the necessity. You may have my card. Please note the name. I will come any time you suggest, or you can write me. I will not detain you any longer. I am sorry. I hope you will see fit to say nothing to your husband of my visit. It will be advisable that you should keep your own counsel in the matter. I value his friendship very highly, and I'm sincerely sorry. Jenny only stared at the floor. Mr. O'Brien went out into the hall to get his coat. Jenny touched the electric button to summon the maid, and Jeanette came. Jenny went back into the library, and Mr. O'Brien paced briskly down the front walk. When she was really alone, she put her doubled hands to her chin and stared at the floor, the queer design of the silken Turkish rug resolving itself into some curious picture. She saw herself in a small cottage somewhere, alone with Vesta. She saw Lester living in another world, and beside him Mrs. Gerald. She saw this house vacant, and then a long stretch of time. And then, she sighed, choking back a desire to cry. With her hands, she brushed away a hot tear from each eye. Then she got up. It must be, she said to herself in thought. It must be. It should have been so long ago. And then, thank God that Papa's dead. Anyhow, he did not live to see this. Chapter 53. The explanation which Lester had concluded to be inevitable, whether it led to separation or legalization of their hitherto banal condition, followed quickly upon the appearance of Mr. O'Brien. On the day Mr. O'Brien called, he had gone on a journey to Hedgewish, a small manufacturing town in Wisconsin, where he had been invited to witness the trial of a new motor intended to operate elevators, with a view to possible investment. When he came out to the house, interested to tell Jenny something about it, even in spite of the fact that he was thinking of leaving her, he felt a sense of depression everywhere. For Jenny, in spite of the serious and sensible conclusion she had reached, was not one who could conceal her feelings easily. She was brooding sadly over her proposed action, realizing that it was best to leave, but finding it hard to summon the courage which would let her talk to him about it. She could not go without telling him what she thought. He ought to want to leave her. She was absolutely convinced that this one course of action, separation, was necessary and advisable. She could not think of him as daring to make a sacrifice of such proportions for her sake, even if he wanted to. It was impossible. It was astonishing to her that he had let things go along as dangerously and silently as he had. When he came in, Jenny did her best to greet him with her accustomed smile, but it was a pretty poor imitation. "Everything all right?" she asked, using her customary phrase of inquiry. "Quite," he answered. "How are things with you?" "Oh, just the same." She walked with him to the library, and he poked at the open fire with a long-handled poker before turning around to survey the room generally. It was 5 o'clock of a January afternoon. Jenny had gone to one of the windows to lower the shade. As she came back, he looked at her critically. "You're not quite your usual self, are you?" he asked, sensing something out of the common in her attitude. "Why, yes, I feel all right," she replied, but there was a peculiar uneven motion to the movement of her lips, a rippling tremor which was unmistakable to him. "I think I know better than that," he said, still gazing at her steadily. "What's the trouble? Anything happened?" She turned away from him a moment to get her breath and collect her senses. Then she faced him again. "There is something," she managed to say. "I have to tell you something." "I know you have," he agreed, half smiling, but with a feeling that there was much of grave import back of this. "What is it?" She was silent for a moment, biting her lips. She did not quite know how to begin. Finally, she broke the spell with, "There was a man here yesterday, a Mr. O'Brien of Cincinnati. Do you know him?" "Yes, I know him. What did he want?" "He came to talk to me about you and your father's will." She paused, for his face clouded immediately. "Why the devil should he be talking to you about my father's will?" he exclaimed. "What did he have to say?" "Please don't get angry, Lester," said Jenny calmly, for she realized that she must remain absolute mistress of herself if anything were to be accomplished toward the resolution of her problem. "He wanted to tell me what a sacrifice you were making," she went on. "He wished to show me that there was only a little time left before you would lose your inheritance. Don't you want to act pretty soon? Don't you want to leave me?" "Damn him," said Lester fiercely. "What the devil does he mean by putting his nose in my private affairs? Can't they let me alone?" He shook himself angrily. "Damn them!" he exclaimed again. "This is some of Robert's work. Why should Knight, Keatley, and O'Brien be meddling in my affairs? This whole business is getting to be a nuisance." He was in a boiling rage in a moment, as was shown by his darkening skin and sulphurous eyes. Jenny trembled before his anger. She did not know what to say. He came to himself sufficiently after a time to add, "Well, just what did he tell you?" "He said that if you married me, you would only get 10,000 a year. That if you didn't, and still lived with me, you would get nothing at all. If you would leave me, or I would leave you, you would get all of 1.5 million. Don't you think you had better leave me now?" She had not intended to propound this leading question so quickly, but it came out as a natural climax to the situation. She realized instantly that if he were really in love with her, he would answer with an emphatic no. If he didn't care, he would hesitate. He would delay. He would seek to put off the evil day of reckoning. "I don't see that," he retorted irritably. "I don't see that there's any need for either interference or hasty action. What I object to is their coming here and mixing in my private affairs." Jenny was cut to the quick by his indifference, his wrath instead of affection. To her, the main point at issue was her leaving him or his leaving her. To him, this recent interference was obviously the chief matter for discussion and consideration. The meddling of others before he was ready to act was the terrible thing. She had hoped, in spite of what she had seen, that possibly, because of the long time they had lived together and the things which, in a way, they had endured together, he might have come to care for her deeply, that she had stirred some emotion in him which would be necessary. He had not married her, of course, but then there had been so many things against them. Now, in this final hour anyhow, he might have shown that he cared deeply, even if he had deemed it necessary to let her go. She felt for the time being as if, for all that she had lived with him so long, she did not understand him. And yet, in spite of this feeling, she knew also that she did. He cared, in his way. He could not care for anyone enthusiastically and demonstratively. He could care enough to seize her and take her to himself as he had, but he could not care enough to keep her if something more important appeared. He was debating her fate now. She was in a quandary, hurt, bleeding, but for once in her life, determined. Whether he wanted to or not, she must not let him make this sacrifice. She must leave him if he would not leave her. It was not important enough that she should stay. There might be but one answer. But might he not show affection? Don't you think you had better act soon? She continued, hoping that some word of feeling would come from him. There's only a little time left, isn't there? Jennie nervously pushed a book to and fro on the table, her fear that she would not be able to keep up appearances troubling her greatly. It was hard for her to know what to do or say. Lester was so terrible when he became angry. Still, it ought not to be so hard for him to go now that he had Mrs. Gerald, if he only wished to do so. And he ought to. His fortune was so much more important to him than anything she could be. Don't worry about that, he replied stubbornly, his wrath at his brother and his family and O'Brien still holding him. There's time enough. I don't know what I want to do yet. I like the effrontery of these people, but I won't talk any more about it. Isn't dinner nearly ready? He was so injured in his pride that he scarcely took the trouble to be civil. He was forgetting all about her and what she was feeling. He hated his brother Robert for this affront. He would have enjoyed wringing the necks of Messengers Knight, Keatley, and O'Brien singly and collectively. The question could not be dropped for good and all, and it came up again at dinner, after Jennie had done her best to collect her thoughts and quiet her nerves. They could not talk very freely because of Vesta and Jeanette, but she managed to get in a word or two. I could take a little cottage somewhere, she suggested softly, hoping to find him in a modified mood. I would not want to stay here. I would not know what to do with a big house like this alone. I wish you wouldn't discuss this business any longer, Jennie, he persisted. I'm in no mood for it. I don't know what I'm going to do anything of the sort. I don't know that I'm going to do anything of the sort. I don't know what I'm going to do. He was so sour and obstinate, because of O'Brien, that she finally gave it up. Vesta was astonished to see her stepfather, usually so courteous, in so grim a mood. Jennie felt a curious sense that she might hold him if she would, for he was doubting. But she knew also that she should not wish. It was not fair to him. It was not fair to herself, or kind or decent. Well, yes, Lester, you must, she pleaded at a later time. I won't talk about it anymore, but you must. I won't let you do anything else. There were hours when it came up afterward. Every day, in fact. In their boudoir, in the library, in the dining room, at breakfast. But not always in words. Jennie was worried. She was looking the worry she felt. She was sure that he should be made to act. Since he was showing more kindly consideration for her, she was all the more certain that he should act soon. Just how to go about it she did not know, but she looked at him longingly, trying to help him make up his mind. She would be happy, she assured herself. She would be happy thinking that he was happy once she was away from him. He was a good man, most delightful in everything, perhaps, save his gift of love. He really did not love her. Could not, perhaps, after all that had happened, even though she loved him most earnestly. But his family had been most brutal in their opposition, and this had affected his attitude. She could understand that too. She could see now how his big, strong brain might be working in a circle. He was too decent to be absolutely brutal about this thing and to leave her. Too really considerate to look sharply after his own interests as he should. Or hers. But he ought to. You must decide, Lester, she kept saying to him from time to time. You must let me go. What difference does it make? I will be all right. Maybe when this thing is all over, you might want to come back to me. If you do, I will be there. I'm not ready to come to a decision, was his invariable reply. I don't know that I want to leave you. This money is important, of course, but money isn't everything. I can live on $10,000 a year if necessary. I've done it in the past. But you're so much more placed in the world now, Lester, she argued. You can't do it. Look how much it costs to run this house alone. And $1.5 million, why, I wouldn't let you think of losing that. I'll go myself first. Where would you think of going if it came to that? He asked curiously. Oh, I'd find some place. Do you remember that little town of Sandwood, this side of Kenosha? I've often thought it would be a pleasant place to live. I don't like to think of this, he said finally in an outburst of frankness. It doesn't seem fair. The conditions have all been against this union of ours. I suppose I should have married you in the first place. I'm sorry now that I didn't. Jennie choked in her throat but said nothing. Anyhow, this won't be the last of it if I can help it, he concluded. He was thinking that the storm might blow over. Once he had the money, and then... But he hated compromises and subterfuges. It came by degrees to be understood that toward the end of February, she should look around at Sandwood and see what she could find. She was to have ample means, he told her. Everything that she wanted. After a time, he might come out and visit her occasionally. And he was determined in his heart that he would make some people pay for the trouble they had caused him. He decided to send for Mr. O'Brien shortly and talk things over. He wanted for his personal satisfaction to tell him what he thought of him. At the same time, in the background of his mind, moved the shadowy figure of Mrs. Gerald. Charming, sophisticated, well-placed in every sense of the word. He did not want to give her the broad reality of full thought, but she was always there. He thought and thought. Perhaps I'd better, he half concluded. When February came, he was ready to act. Chapter 54. The little town of Sandwood, this side of Kenosha, as Jennie had expressed it, was only a short distance from Chicago, an hour and 15 minutes by local train. It had a population of some 300 families dwelling in small cottages, which were scattered over a pleasant area of lakeshore property. They were not rich people. The houses were not worth more than from $3,000 to $5,000 each, but in most cases they were harmoniously constructed, and the surrounding trees, green for the entire year, gave them a pleasing summery appearance. Jenny, at the time they had passed by there, it was an outing taken behind a pair of fast horses, had admired the look of the little white church steeple, set down among green trees, and the gentle rocking of the boats upon the summer water. "I should like to live in a place like this sometime," she had said to Lester, and he had made the comment that it was a little too peaceful for him. "I can imagine getting to the place where I might like this, but not now. It's too withdrawn." Jenny thought of that expression afterward. It came to her when she thought that the world was trying. If she had to be alone ever and could afford it, she would like to live in a place like Sandwood. There she would have a little garden, some chickens perhaps, a tall pole with a pretty birdhouse on it, and flowers and trees and green grass everywhere about. If she could have a little cottage in a place like this which commanded a view of the lake, she could sit of a summer evening and sew. Vesta could play about or come home from school. She might have a few friends, or not any. She was beginning to think that she could do very well living alone if it were not for Vesta's social needs. Books were pleasant things. She was finding that out. Books like Irving's Sketchbook, Lamb's Elia, and Hawthorne's Twice Told Tales. Vesta was coming to be quite a musician in her way, having a keen sense of the delicate and refined in musical composition. She had a natural sense of harmony and a love for those songs and instrumental compositions which reflect sentimental and passionate moods. And she could sing and play quite well. Her voice was, of course, quite untrained. She was only 14, but it was pleasant to listen to. She was beginning to show the combined traits of her mother and father. Jenny's gentle, speculative turn of mind, combined with Brander's vivacity of spirit and innate executive capacity. She could talk to her mother in a sensible way about things: nature, books, dress, love. And from her developing tendencies, Jenny caught keen glimpses of the new worlds which Vesta was to explore. The nature of modern school life, its consideration of various divisions of knowledge, music, science, all came to Jenny watching her daughter take up new themes. Vesta was evidently going to be a woman of considerable ability, not irritably aggressive, but self-constructive. She would be able to take care of herself. All this pleased Jenny and gave her great hopes for Vesta's future. The cottage, which was finally secured at Sandwood, was only a story and a half in height, but it was raised upon red brick piers between which were set green lattices and about which ran a veranda. The house was long and narrow, its full length, some 5 rooms in a row facing a lake. There was a large dining room with windows open even with the floor, a large library with built-in shelves for books, and a parlor whose 3 large windows afforded air and sunshine at all times. The plot of ground in which this cottage stood was 100 feet square and ornamented with a few trees. The former owner had laid out flower beds and arranged green hardwood tubs for the reception of various hardy plants and vines. The house was painted white with green shutters and green shingles. It had been Lester's idea, since this thing must be, that Jennie might keep the house in Hyde Park just as it was. But she did not want to do that. She could not think of living there alone. The place was too full of memories. At first, she did not think she would take anything much with her, but she finally saw that it was advisable to do as Lester suggested, to fit out the new place with a selection of silverware, hangings, and furniture from the Hyde Park house. "You have no idea what you will or may want," he said. "Take everything. I certainly don't want any of it." A lease of the cottage was taken for 2 years, together with an option for an additional 5 years, including the privilege of purchase. So long as he was letting her go, Lester wanted to be generous. He could not think of her as wanting for anything, and he did not propose that she should. His one troublesome thought was, what explanation was to be made to Vesta? He liked her very much and wanted her life kept free of complications. "Why not send her off to a boarding school until spring?" he suggested once. But owing to the lateness of the season, this was abandoned as inadvisable. Later they agreed that business affairs made it necessary for him to travel and for Jennie to move. Later, Vesta could be told that Jennie had left him for any reason she chose to give. It was a trying situation, all the more bitter to Jennie because she realized that in spite of the wisdom of it, indifference to her was involved. He really did not care enough as much as he cared. The relationship of man and woman, which we study so passionately in the hope of finding heaven, knows what key to the mystery of existence holds no more difficult or trying situation than this of mutual compatibility broken or disrupted by untoward conditions, which in themselves have so little to do with the real force and beauty of the relationship itself. These days of final dissolution in which this household, so charmingly arranged, the scene of so many pleasant activities, was literally going to pieces, was a period of great trial to both Jennie and Lester. On her part, it was one of intense suffering, for she was of that stable nature that rejoices to fix itself in a serviceable and harmonious relationship, and then stays so. For her life was made up of those mystic cords of sympathy and memory which bind up the transient elements of nature into a harmonious and enduring scene. One of those cords, this home was her home, united and made beautiful by her affection and consideration for each person and every object. Now the time had come when it must cease. If she had ever had anything before in her life which had been like this, it might have been easier to part with it now, though, as she had proved, Jennie's affections were not based in any way upon material considerations. Her love of life and of personality were free from the taint of selfishness. She went about among these various rooms selecting this rug, that set of furniture, this and that ornament, wishing all the time with all her heart and soul that it need not be. Just to think, in a little while Lester would not come any more of an evening. She would not need to get up first of a morning and see that coffee was made for her lord, that the table in the dining room looked just so. It had been a habit of hers to arrange a bouquet for the table out of the richest blooming flowers of the conservatory, and she had always felt in doing it that it was particularly for him. Now it would not be necessary any more, not for him. When one is accustomed to wait for the sound of a certain carriage wheel of an evening grating upon your carriage drive, when one is used to listen at 11, 12, and one, waking naturally and joyfully to the echo of a certain step on the stair, the separation, the ending of these things is keen with pain. These were the thoughts that were running through Jenny's brain, hour after hour and day after day. Lester, on his part, was suffering in another fashion. His was not the sorrow of lacerated affection, of discarded and despised love, but of that painful sense of unfairness which comes to one who knows that he is making a sacrifice of the virtues, kindness, loyalty, affection, to policy. Policy was dictating a very splendid course of action from one point of view. Free of Jenny, providing for her admirably, he was free to go his way, taking to himself the mass of affairs which come naturally with great wealth. He could not help thinking of the 1,001 little things which Jenny had been accustomed to do for him, and the 101 comfortable and pleasant and delightful things she meant to him. The virtues which she possessed were quite dear to his mind. He had gone over them time and again. Now he was compelled to go over them finally, to see that she was suffering without making a sign. Her manner and attitude toward him in these last days were quite the same as they had always been. No more, no less. She was not indulging in private hysterics, as another woman might have done. She was not pretending a fortitude in suffering she did not feel, showing him one face while wishing him to see another behind it. She was calm, gentle, considerate, thoughtful of him, where he would go and what he would do, without irritating him by her inquiries. He was struck quite favorably by her ability to take a large situation largely, and he admired her. There was something to this woman, let the world think what it might. It was a shame that her life was passed under such a troubled star. Still a great world was calling him. The sound of its voice was in his ears. It had on occasion shown him its bared teeth. Did he really dare to hesitate? The last hour came when, having made excuses to this and that neighbor, when having spread the information that they were going abroad, when Lester had engaged rooms at the auditorium and the mass of furniture which could not be used had gone to storage, that it was necessary to say farewell to this Hyde Park domicile. Jenny had visited Sandwood in company with Lester several times. He had carefully examined the character of the place. He was satisfied that it was nice, but lonely. Spring was at hand. The flowers would be something. She was going to keep a gardener and a man of all work. Vesta would be with her. Very well, he said. Only I want you to be comfortable. In the meantime, Lester had been arranging his personal affairs. He had notified Messrs. Knight, Keatley, and O'Brien through his own attorney, Mr. Watson, that he would expect them to deliver his share of his father's securities on a given date. He had made up his mind that as long as he was compelled by circumstances to do this thing, he would do a number of other things quite equally ruthless. He would probably marry Mrs. Gerald. He would sit as a director in the United Carriage Company with his share of the stock. It would be impossible to keep him out. If he had Mrs. Gerald's money, he would become a controlling factor in the United Traction of Cincinnati, in which his brother was heavily interested, and in the Western Steel Works, of which his brother was now the leading advisor. What a different figure he would be now from that which he had been during the past few years. Jenny was depressed to the point of despair. She was tremendously lonely. This home had meant so much to her. When she first came here and neighbors had begun to drop in, she had imagined herself on the threshold of a great career, that someday, possibly, Lester would marry her. Now, blow after blow had been delivered, and the home and dream were a ruin. Gerhardt was gone. Jeanette, Harry Ward, and Mrs. Frizzle had been discharged. The furniture, for a good part, was in storage, and for her, practically, Lester was no more. She realized clearly that he would not come back. If he could do this thing now, even considerately, he could do much more when he was free and away later. Immersed in his great affairs, he would forget, of course. And why not? She did not fit in. Had not everything illustrated that to her? Love was not enough in this world. That was so plain. One needed education, wealth, training, the ability to fight and scheme. She did not want to do that. She could not. The day came when the house was finally closed and the old life was at an end. Lester traveled with Jennie to Sandwood. He spent some little while in the house trying to get her used to the idea of change. It was not so bad. He intimated that he would come again soon, but he went away, and all his words were as nothing against the fact of the actual and spiritual separation. When Jennie saw him going down the brick walk that afternoon, his solid, conservative figure clad in a new tweed suit, his overcoat on his arm, self-reliance and prosperity written all over him, she thought that she would die. She had kissed Lester goodbye and had wished him joy, prosperity, peace. And she made an excuse to go to her bedroom. Vesta came after a time to seek her, but now her eyes were quite dry. Everything had subsided to a dull ache. The new life was actually begun for her, a life without Lester, without Gerhardt, without anyone save Vesta. What curious things have happened to me, she thought, as she went into the kitchen, for she had determined to do at least some of her own work. She needed the distraction. She did not want to think. If it were not for Vesta, she would have sought some regular outside employment. Anything to keep from brooding, for in that direction lay madness.